Marcus Vale had never considered himself particularly offensive to look at, which made Dr. Lyra Vex's sudden aversion to his presence all the more perplexing. The Nixian scientist had gone from enthusiastically sharing research findings with him to practically sprinting from rooms whenever he entered. The Helios research station hung in perpetual orbit around a binary star system, its crystalline architecture a testament to the collaboration between humanity and the Nixian collective. The station's curved corridors sparkled with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in harmony with the facility's power grid, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that still took Marcus's breath away after 6 months as Earth's diplomatic liaison. "Dr. Vex," Marcus called out, quickening his pace as he spotted the familiar silhouette ahead. Lyra's characteristic silver-streaked skin caught the corridor's light, creating rippling patterns that usually fascinated him. This time, however, he was more focused on the way she stiffened at the sound of his voice. "Ambassador Vale," she replied without turning, her melodic voice carrying an edge he'd never heard before. "I'm afraid I'm rather busy at the moment." "You've been rather busy for 3 weeks now," Marcus pointed out, maintaining a professional tone despite his frustration. "Ever since the quantum resonance experiment, you've barely spoken 2 words to me. If I've committed some kind of cultural faux pas, I'd appreciate knowing what it is." Lyra's shoulders tensed, the silver patterns on her skin flickering erratically. It's nothing you've done wrong." She took a deliberate step away as he approached. "Please, just maintain your distance." Marcus stopped, confusion giving way to concern. "Lyra, we've worked together for months. You've never had a problem with proximity before. What's changed?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Finally, Lyra turned, and Marcus found himself caught in the gaze of her iridescent eyes. The pain he saw there made his chest tighten. "What's changed," she said softly, "is that I've made a terrible mistake. I let myself." She broke off, the silver patterns on her skin pulsing rapidly. "The resonance experiment didn't just align quantum particles, Ambassador. It aligned something else. Something that should have remained dormant." Before Marcus could press further, Dr. Theron Nadu, the station's head of xenobiology, rounded the corner. The older Nixian's eyes widened slightly at the scene before him. "Dr. Vex," Theron said sharply. "Your presence is required in Laboratory 7. Lyra practically sagged with relief at the interruption. "Of course, Doctor. Ambassador Vale, if you'll excuse me." She hurried away, leaving Marcus staring after her with mounting frustration. "Ambassador," Theron acknowledged with a slight inclination of his head. "I trust you're finding your stay with us enlightening." There was something in the elder Nixian's tone that caught Marcus's attention. "Actually, Dr. Nadu, perhaps you could help me understand something. Has there been some change in protocol regarding human-Nixian interaction that I should be aware of?" Theron's expression remained carefully neutral, but Marcus noticed the way his own silver markings flickered briefly. "Not officially, no. However, sometimes, individual circumstances require individual solutions." He paused, studying Marcus with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know about Nixian empathic capabilities?" "Only what's in the official briefings," Marcus replied. "Your species has highly developed emotional sensitivity, allowing for nonverbal communication among your own kind. But it's supposedly limited to Nixian interaction." "Supposedly," Theron repeated, the word hanging meaningfully between them. "And what if I told you that under certain conditions, those limitations could shift?" Marcus's diplomatic training kicked in, his mind racing through implications. "I'd say that sounds like the kind of information that should have been included in our cultural exchange protocols. Some things," Theron said carefully, "are better left undiscovered. For everyone's safety." With that cryptic statement, he turned to leave, then paused. "Ambassador Vale. Perhaps it would be best if you limited your interaction with Dr. Vex to official communications only. For her sake, if not your own." As Marcus watched Theron disappear down the corridor, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stumbled onto something far more complex than a simple case of cultural misunderstanding. The quantum resonance experiment, Lyra's sudden withdrawal, Theron's warning, pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. But as he stood there, surrounded by the pulsing lights of an alien station that had become his temporary home, Marcus knew he couldn't let it go. Not when Lyra's pain had been so evident, not when every instinct told him there was more to this story than anyone was willing to tell him. With renewed determination, he headed toward his quarters. If the answers weren't going to be freely given, he'd have to find them himself. Even if it meant potentially violating every diplomatic protocol in the book. After all, sometimes the most important discoveries came from asking the questions everyone else was afraid to voice. The Helios Research Station's archives were technically open to all personnel with diplomatic clearance, but Marcus had a feeling he was pushing the boundaries of that access as he dug deeper into restricted xenobiology files. The holoscreen before him cast a blue glow across his quarters as he scrolled through decades of research on Nixian physiology. Most of it was standard diplomatic briefing material, biological basics, cultural norms, medical considerations. But buried beneath layers of bureaucratic documentation, he found something interesting, a classified report on empathic resonance accidents. Computer, Marcus murmured, expand file NX 7249 beta. The screen filled with incident reports, each more disturbing than the last. Cases of Nixian scientists developing dangerous physiological reactions to prolonged exposure to certain individuals. Instances of emotional feedback loops causing system-wide failures. And most intriguingly, a pattern of these incidents increasing after close work with non-Nixian species. A soft chime at his door interrupted his research. Enter, he called, quickly minimizing the screens. To his surprise, Dr. Theron Nadu stepped into his quarters, silver markings dimmed in what Marcus had learned to recognize as concern. I thought I might find you here, Ambassador. Pursuing answers that might be better left undisturbed. Marcus didn't bother denying it. With all due respect, Doctor, if there's a genuine safety concern regarding human-Nixian interaction, it should have been disclosed in our initial agreements. Safety concern? Theron's laugh held no humor. No, Ambassador. What you're dealing with is far more complex than simple safety protocols. He moved to the window, watching the binary stars dance their eternal orbit. Tell me, in your research, did you come across any mention of the resonance crisis? Briefly, Marcus admitted. Something about an epidemic of empathic overload cases about 50 years ago. An oversimplification, but yes. Theron's fingers traced patterns in the condensation on the window. What the official records don't tell you is that it wasn't an epidemic, it was an evolution. Our species began developing deeper, more dangerous forms of empathic connection. Connections that could transcend our biological limitations. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. And this has something to do with Lyra's behavior. Dr. Vex, Theron emphasized the formal title, has developed what we call a quantum empathic bond. A connection so deep that her biological systems have begun treating your neural patterns as an extension of her own. That doesn't sound so terrible, Marcus ventured. Theron turned to face him, expression grave. Imagine your immune system suddenly deciding your heart is a foreign object. Imagine your own body turning against itself because it can't distinguish between self and other. That's what's happening to her on a neurological level every time she's near you. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. She's not avoiding me because she wants to. She's avoiding me because prolonged exposure to you could literally tear her mind apart, Theron finished. These bonds, they're not meant to form across species. The neurological differences are too great. When they do form, the results are unpredictable at best, catastrophic at worst. Marcus sank into his chair, mind racing. There has to be a way to prevent it, or reverse it. Many have tried. The results of those experiments are also in your classified files, if you care to look. Though I warn you, they make for rather grim reading. Theron moved toward the door, then paused. Ambassador, I understand your desire to help, but sometimes the kindest thing we can do is maintain our distance. After Theron left, Marcus returned to his research with renewed intensity. The files on failed treatments were indeed grim, cases of permanent neural damage, psychological trauma, and worse. But buried in the technical jargon and clinical reports, he found something that made his heart race, a theoretical proposal for using quantum stabilization to regulate cross-species empathic bonds. The proposal had been dismissed as too risky, the potential for catastrophic failure too high. But as Marcus studied the complex theoretical frameworks, he began to see possibilities that its original authors might have missed. Modern quantum technology had advanced significantly since these reports were filed. His comm unit chimed with an incoming message. When he opened it, his breath caught. It was from Lyra, the first direct communication she'd initiated in weeks. I know what you're researching, her message read. Theron told me. It's too dangerous, Marcus. Please, just let it go. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, fingers hovering over the response interface. Finally, he began to type. What if it doesn't have to be? What if there's a way to stabilize the bond instead of fighting it? I found something in the archives, a theoretical approach that might work with modern quantum tech. But I need your help to refine it. The response came almost immediately. You don't understand what you're asking. The risks. I understand exactly what I'm asking, he typed back. And I think you know as well as I do that maintaining distance isn't a real solution. We're scientists, Lyra. Let's solve this like scientists. The minutes stretched out agonizingly as he waited for her response. Finally, 3 words appeared on his screen. Meet me. Lab 7. Marcus smiled, already reaching for his data pad to download the relevant research files. He had a feeling they were about to venture into uncharted scientific territory, and possibly break every safety protocol in the station's handbook. But as he headed for the lab, he couldn't help thinking that some risks were worth taking. Especially when the alternative was watching someone suffer in silence. Laboratory 7 hummed with the soft pulse of quantum machinery as Marcus entered. The room was dimly lit, bioluminescent panels casting everything in a gentle blue glow. Lyra stood at the far end, her silver-streaked skin shimmering as she manipulated a holographic display. You shouldn't be here, she said without turning. Neither of us should. And yet here we are, Marcus replied, keeping his distance as he moved to a nearby console. I've been reviewing the quantum stabilization theories from the archives. With modern technology, we might be able to create a containment field that could regulate the empathic resonance. Lyra finished, finally turning to face him. I've already thought of that. The problem isn't the theory, Marcus. It's the application. She gestured to the holographic display, which showed a complex network of neural patterns. This is a standard Nixian empathic signature. And this, she brought up another display, is mine, when you're nearby. The difference was startling. Where the first pattern showed ordered, flowing lines, the second was a chaos of conflicting signals, like a storm system torn between competing pressure fronts. The quantum resonance experiment didn't create this connection, Lyra explained, her voice tight. It just amplified something that was already there. Something I should have recognized sooner. Marcus studied the patterns, his diplomatic training warring with scientific curiosity. These interference patterns, they're not random, are they? They're responding to something specific. Lyra's skin flickered with what might have been embarrassment. Human emotional signatures are intense. Your species feels things with a depth that most Nixians can barely comprehend. When the resonance experiment aligned our quantum states, it was like suddenly turning up the volume on everything at once, Marcus finished, understanding dawning. That's why the previous attempts at treatment failed. They were trying to suppress the connection instead of harmonizing it. He moved to another console, pulling up the theoretical models he'd been studying. Look at this. The old approach tried to create barriers between the conflicting neural patterns. But what if we did the opposite? What if we created a quantum field that could act as a translator instead of a wall? Lyra frowned, moving closer to study the display before catching herself and stepping back. That's actually not impossible. The mathematics would be incredibly complex, but with the station's quantum processors. We could model it first, Marcus suggested, already typing calculations. Run simulations before attempting any actual field generation. Minimize the risks. The risks are still substantial, Lyra warned, but he could hear the shift in her tone. The scientist in her was engaging with the problem, overriding her fears. If we get the harmonics wrong, the feedback could cause permanent neural damage. To both of us. Marcus paused in his calculations, looking up at her. I trust you. The simple statement seemed to catch her off guard. Her skin patterns swirled in complex emotions he couldn't read. That's a dangerous thing to say to someone who could accidentally kill you. I've read the reports, Lyra. I know exactly what I'm risking. The question is, do you trust yourself enough to try? She was quiet for a long moment, studying the neural pattern displays. Finally, she reached out and began adjusting parameters on the quantum model. We'll need to modify the containment field generators. And create redundant safety protocols. Already working on it, Marcus said, unable to hide his smile as he pulled up the station's technical schematics. I may have already drafted some preliminary modifications while I was researching. Of course you did, Lyra muttered, but there was a warmth in her voice he hadn't heard in weeks. You realize if Theron catches us, we'll both be removed from the station. Then we better not get caught. They worked through the night, trading theories and adjusting calculations. As the binary stars rose outside the station's windows, they had something that looked theoretically possible, a quantum harmonization field that could potentially stabilize their neural patterns without suppressing the empathic connection. The simulations look promising, Lyra said, reviewing the final models. But the real test will be actual implementation, Marcus finished. He looked at the containment chamber they'd modified, its interior now lined with quantum resonance emitters. How soon can we try it? Lyra's skin patterns flickered with anxiety. Marcus, are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. The field will either work, or things will get very interesting very quickly, he said lightly, though they both knew the stakes. But staying apart isn't working, Lyra. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of watching you run away. She met his gaze, her iridescent eyes showing a mix of fear and determination. Tomorrow, she said finally. I need to run a few more calibrations, and we should both rest before attempting something this insane. Marcus suggested. I was going to say unprecedented, but insane works too. She began shutting down the equipment, her movements precise and controlled. Meet me here at 0400. The station's power usage is lowest then, we'll have the best chance of avoiding detection. As Marcus turned to leave, she called after him softly. Marcus? Thank you. For not giving up. He paused at the door, looking back at her. That's not really my style. Besides, some connections are worth fighting for. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to voice. But as Marcus made his way back to his quarters, he couldn't help feeling that they were on the verge of something revolutionary, not just scientifically, but personally as well. Whether that revolution would end in breakthrough or catastrophe remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, tomorrow would change everything. At precisely 0400 hours, Marcus stood before the modified containment chamber in Laboratory 7, his heart racing with equal parts excitement and apprehension. The quantum harmonization field generators hummed softly, casting an ethereal glow throughout the room. Final diagnostics are complete, Lyra announced, her fingers dancing across the control interface. All systems are functioning within expected parameters. She paused, looking up at him. This is your last chance to back out. Marcus stepped into the chamber, trying to project more confidence than he felt. Not a chance. Besides, I've already updated my will to leave all my worldly possessions to the station's coffee synthesizer. Your attempt at humor is concerning, Lyra muttered, but he caught the slight flicker of amusement in her skin patterns. Remember, if you experience any unusual sensations, signal immediately and you'll shut down the field, he finished. I remember the protocols, Lyra. We've only reviewed them about 20 times. She activated the chamber's seal, her expression turning serious. Initiating quantum field in 3, 2, 1. The air around Marcus shimmered as the harmonization field sprang to life. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, he became aware of a subtle shift in his perception, as if someone had adjusted the focus on reality itself. Field stability at 97%, Lyra reported, monitoring the readings. Neural patterns are interesting. She frowned at the display. I'm detecting increased synchronization between our quantum signatures. How do you feel? Like I'm watching the world through a lens that's slightly out of alignment, Marcus replied, flexing his fingers experimentally. But not uncomfortable. Actually, it's almost peaceful. Lyra's skin patterns shifted in surprise. That's unexpected. The previous attempts at cross-species neural harmonization all reported significant discomfort during initial exposure. She hesitated, then slowly approached the chamber. I'm going to test our proximity tolerance. As she drew closer, Marcus braced himself for the familiar surge of discomfort, but it never came. Instead, he felt an odd sense of completion, as if pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed were falling into place. Your neural patterns are adapting to the field, Lyra observed, her voice tight with concentration. The harmonization is holding steady at. She broke off suddenly, her skin flaring with brilliant patterns. Marcus felt a wave of something wash over him. Not pain, but awareness. Deep, profound awareness of another consciousness brushing against his own. Lyra, he managed, his voice strained. I feel it too, she whispered. This isn't supposed to. The field isn't just stabilizing the connection, it's enhancing it, a new voice finished. They both turned to find Dr. Theron Nadu standing in the laboratory doorway, his expression unreadable. Just as it did 70 years ago, during the first attempts at quantum harmonization. Marcus felt Lyra's shock ripple through their newfound connection. 70 years. But the records were deliberately altered, Theron said, moving into the lab. To prevent others from making the same mistakes we did. He gazed at the quantum field generators with something like regret. Did you never wonder why our species developed such strong empathic abilities in the first place, Dr. Vex? Or why we're so careful about maintaining emotional distance? The official history says it was an evolutionary adaptation, Lyra said slowly. A way to facilitate communication and social bonding. Theron's laugh held no humor. A pretty lie, told to protect our people from a harder truth. Our empathic abilities aren't natural evolution, they're the result of ancient genetic engineering. An attempt to create the perfect diplomatic species, capable of truly understanding any being we encountered. Marcus felt the weight of revelation settling over them both. What went wrong? Nothing went wrong, Theron said quietly. The engineering worked perfectly. Too perfectly. We gained the ability to form deep empathic bonds with any sentient species, bonds that transcended mere understanding. Bonds that could reshape neural architecture itself. The resonance crisis, Lyra breathed. It wasn't an epidemic at all, was it? It was. The activation of dormant genetic programming, Theron confirmed. Triggered by increased contact with other species. Particularly humans, whose emotional capacity proved especially compatible with our engineered empathic systems. Marcus's mind raced with implications. But why hide this? Why not use it to facilitate better understanding between species? Because understanding comes with a price, Theron said sharply. These bonds don't just connect minds, Ambassador. They reshape them. Change them. The more time bonded pairs spend together, the more their neural patterns align. Eventually, they become something neither fully human nor fully Nixian. He moved to the control panel, his fingers hovering over the shutdown sequence. I cannot allow you to continue this experiment. The consequences are ours to bear, Lyra interrupted, stepping between Theron and the controls. You talk about change as if it's something to fear, but isn't that exactly what both our species need? Real understanding? Real connection? Marcus felt her determination flowing through their strengthening bond, mixing with his own. She's right, he said, straightening in the chamber. You can't stop evolution, Doctor. Even engineered evolution has to be allowed to run its course. Theron looked between them, his expression conflicted. You don't understand what you're choosing. The changes will be irreversible. Maybe, Marcus agreed, meeting Lyra's gaze. But some changes are worth the risk. The news of what happened in Laboratory 7 spread through the Helios research station like a quantum wave, impossible to contain once observed. Within days, the facility was buzzing with equal parts excitement and concern as both human and Nixian authorities descended to investigate the unauthorized experiment. Marcus stood at the observation deck, watching ships arrive through the crystalline windows. The quantum harmonization field had been shut down, but its effects lingered. He could still feel Lyra's presence at the edges of his consciousness, not intrusive, but comforting, like the awareness of sunlight on skin. The preliminary medical reports are fascinating, Lyra said, joining him at the window. She no longer needed to maintain physical distance, their neural patterns now permanently synchronized. Our brain scans show the formation of entirely new neural pathways. Structures that aren't typically found in either human or Nixian physiology. Theron's warning about irreversible changes, Marcus mused. He wasn't exaggerating, was he? No, she admitted, her skin patterns shifting in contemplation. But I don't think he fully understood what those changes meant. We're not losing ourselves, Marcus. We're becoming something more. The door to the observation deck slid open, admitting a delegation of officials from both species. At their head walked Ambassador Reina Torres, Earth's senior diplomatic representative to the Nixian collective. Well, Torres said, looking between them with barely concealed fascination, you've certainly caused quite a stir. The Joint Scientific Council has been in session for 3 days straight discussing the implications of your experiment. And their conclusion? Marcus asked, unconsciously stepping closer to Lyra. That's the interesting part, Torres replied, a slight smile playing at her lips. They can't seem to reach one. Half the council sees this as a breakthrough in interspecies relations. The other half wants to classify everything and pretend it never happened. Let me guess, Lyra said dryly, the divide falls along species lines. Actually, no, Torres said. That's what makes this so fascinating. We're seeing divisions within both human and Nixian camps. It seems your little experiment has forced both our peoples to confront some uncomfortable questions about evolution, progress, and what it truly means to understand one another. Marcus felt Lyra's surprise echo through their connection. So what happens now? Now, Torres said, you two have a choice to make. The council is preparing 2 proposals. The first would see you both reassigned to a dedicated research facility, where your condition can be studied under controlled conditions. And the second? Lyra asked. The second would make you official ambassadors of a new diplomatic initiative. One focused on exploring the potential benefits of controlled neural harmonization between our species. Torres's expression turned serious. But I should warn you, either choice comes with significant personal cost. You'll be pioneers, whether as research subjects or diplomatic representatives. Your lives will never be truly private again. Marcus and Lyra exchanged glances, a wordless conversation flowing between them through their bond. After a moment, they both smiled. With all due respect, Ambassador, Marcus said, I think we've moved beyond concerns about privacy. What we've discovered, what we've become, it's bigger than just us. He's right, Lyra added. The ancient engineers who created my species' empathic abilities didn't make a mistake. They just couldn't have anticipated how their work would evolve. How we would evolve. We choose the diplomatic initiative, Marcus continued. Not because it's easier, but because it's necessary. Both our species need to understand that real connection, real understanding, isn't about maintaining safe distances. It's about being willing to change together. Torres nodded, as if she'd expected this answer. I'll inform the council. They'll want to begin preparations immediately. This won't be an easy path, you understand. You'll face resistance, skepticism, possibly even fear. We know, Lyra said simply. But some connections are worth fighting for. Marcus smiled at the echo of his own words from that night in the lab. Through their bond, he felt Lyra's answering amusement, tinged with deep affection. As the delegation filed out, leaving them alone on the observation deck, Marcus turned to watch the binary stars dance their eternal orbit. Their light played across Lyra's silver-streaked skin, creating patterns that he could now read as easily as human expressions. You know, he said thoughtfully, when I took this diplomatic posting, I expected cultural misunderstandings, awkward translations, maybe the occasional diplomatic incident. I didn't expect to end up helping evolve both our species. Lyra's skin flickered with laughter. And I didn't expect a human diplomat to completely upend everything I thought I knew about my own biology. I suppose we're even. Through their connection, they shared the moment of quiet joy, of profound understanding that went beyond words or even thoughts. They had crossed a boundary that most believed impossible, and in doing so, opened a door that could never truly be closed again. As they stood together, watching new ships arrive at the station, both knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and resistance from those who feared change. But they would face it together, not just as representatives of their respective species, but as living proof that the greatest discoveries often come from being willing to risk everything for connection. The distance between their species had always been measured in more than just light years. But now, in that space between what was and what could be, something new was growing. Something that promised to bridge not just the gap between two individuals, but between two civilizations ready to evolve together.